Hey y'all, we are climbing the labyrinth once again, and I will tell you that this one is one that is associated kind of to an episode that I did last week. I'll put a little bubble up here that you can watch last week's, where Christina, one of the RCA communications director, I think, sends out some stuff, and it's usually filled with things that you should think. And so not news and information, but more opinion and propaganda, in my opinion. This week, I gotta really call some things out. And I will tell you first off, this is a really good video, or at least I hope it is, for those of you that have been really struggling with what to think regarding all of the racial injustice stuff, all the systemic racism, all of the bias that's being pushed towards everyone, the white privilege, all of those things. And specifically, if you are within a Christian denomination, if you're within a church that begins to embrace this, what many are calling wokeism, being woke, that you've been awakened, you've awoken to the new reality of how bad you are as a white person. And what I want to do is call out a few things specifically within the RCA, although these things will apply to other churches, other denominations that are kind of going out there right now. So if you are in the RCA, this is going to make really, really close to home sense. If you are a part of the group that's not sure whether you want to be in the RCA or the ARC or the PCA or move on to a different place, this will give you a sense of where the RCA is going. So, hopefully this is something that helps you and that you can share it. Let people know. I'm completely okay with that, with sharing with other people, and even people within the RCA that don't agree. They need to know how other people feel too. It's been far too long where the idea that only people that live in the progressive side of things get to voice their opinion really loudly and be heard, and that's not true. You can have a conservative point of view and still voice your opinion just as loud. Just because they talk louder or have better signs or whatever doesn't mean that they're the ones that are actually right. Let's just jump in here. Here's a screenshot, voila, that will show us. This is on the RCA's website, and I got this through an email from the General Secretary Eddy Alemán. And so here it is. It's General Secretary calls for annual day of prayer and fasting for justice and reconciliation, with a huge mural of George Floyd behind it. Let's just dig in a little further here and not have too many assumptions. When you come down, I'll zoom in a little here. RCA General Secretary released this statement on April 23rd. As of right now, it is April 28th. It is just after noonish. This Sunday, it will be 11 months since George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. Earlier this week, Officer Derek Chauvin was held accountable for George Floyd's death when the jury returned the guilty verdicts on all charges. You can go and look at a number of things regarding the verdicts. I'm not here to comment on those. I actually did a little bit in last week's that you saw earlier, just regarding the different charges and kind of what really seemed to fit and what didn't fit. Moving on. The verdicts are a step in the right direction, and they are only a step. Now, what you should ask yourself is, a step in the right direction towards what? Is this a step in the right direction towards justice against a person that committed a crime against another person? May that be Derek Chauvin against George Floyd? Or is this something more? Is he poking at something more? Is he talking about a specific instance of a person that did something wrong to another person, and accountability was held up there, and it's a step in the right direction towards people being accountable for their actions? Or is this a step in the right direction towards something more? something out there, something systemic, something that is outside of what you can really grasp and you need to be enlightened to. Well, let's dig in. No sooner than the verdict was announced, Micaiah Bryant was killed in Columbus. Okay, let's immediately put that to rest again, that she was trying to stab another person. She was trying to stab another person. Shouldn't have to say a whole lot more about that. And Daunte Wright's funeral took place the same day. Both were shot by police. Okay, Daunte Wright, the lady came out, the officer came out and said she thought it was her taser. Now, is that bad training on her part? Possibly. Is that negligence on her part? Possibly. Will she have a trial? Yes. Was that something that was systemically racist? I don't know. But both of them, all of them were killed by police, is exactly what Eddie's getting at here. He is drawing the connection that between George Floyd's death, between Micaiah Bryant's death, and Daunte Wright's death, that all of those things were connected by police. So let's do a thing here. Let's go to I'll go to the top. This is the Washington Post, and they have one of the biggest databases for police shootings. So since 2015, the Washington Post began to log all of the fatal police shootings. You jump down here and you scroll through, and they give you a little bit of information here, and they give you a graph of how many there are and some of that stuff. And then they let you know right away that although half of the people shot and killed by police are white, black Americans are shot at a disproportionate rate. So they're saying that more black Americans are shot and killed than white Americans in their percentage. You should ask yourself the question, why would that be possible? What would lead something like that to happen? Well, let's go to the Bureau of the Department of Justice. Bureau of Justice Statistics, and this came out in January 2021, and this is race and ethnicity of violent crime offenders and arrestees in 2018. That's the most recent that they have as far as specific data that they've logged. Right off the bat, they tell you a few things that I'll zoom in here if I can. That of the United States population in 2018, 60.4% were white, and 12.5% were black. As a part of that, then non-fatal violent crime, so where somebody did not die, a violent crime, and you can look up what that means. That in the bottom it tells you this includes rape, robbery, aggravated assault, and other assaults. So simple assaults and other things. 46% of all non-violent crimes were committed by white people. So of the 60% of the United States, and let's just be practical here, the majority within stats that I don't have pulled up right now say that it's actually men that commit violent crimes more than women. So, and approximately within census data, you get about 51%-ish. So we'll just say 50% because it's just under 51% are women. So let's just call it 50%. So half of that, so 30-ish% of the United States population is committing 46% of non-fatal violent crimes. And of that, then when you exclude the other practical assaults, the simple assault things that are kind of really minor, then you get 38.7%, so 39%. So of 30-ish% of the population, they're committing 39% of non-fatal violent crimes, excluding the minimal ones. When you go to the black population, then you have 12.5% of the total population is black. If you take that and go by the same logic of half of that, then you're looking at just over 6% of the population commits 33% of the non-fatal violent crimes. And of that, 36% are the ones that exclude simple assaults. So the simple minor things, 36%. So 6% approximately. We could just use the big round numbers. 12.5% commit 36% of the non-fatal violent crimes, excluding simple assault, or 33%, which includes simple assault. 60% commit 39% of non-fatal violent crimes. Just the percentages of how many are in there, there is a larger amount of people that are within the Black community, within the Black population specifically from this data. This is not me making a judgment call. This is not me deciding for them. This is not me racially profiling anything. I am looking at the numbers on the screen and reading them. You scroll down a little bit further, and you get to other tables like race and ethnicity of offenders of nonviolent crimes or of non-lethal violent crimes, and you get offenders in the NCVS. And here you see that those offenders are 43.8% black, 43.8% white, and 35.9% black. So we can say 44 and 36% roughly. Those that are reported by the police, so reported to the police, is 41% of those crimes are white. 42.8, 43% of the crimes reported to the police. So of all the crimes, 43% are reported to police, and the offender is black. How many of those are arrested? 38.7% are white. 36% are black. So while those being reported to police is closer to 43%, they are not being arrested at disproportionate numbers. So the number of people committing those crimes reported to the police, where there's actually incident reports filled out, the number of people arrested for those crimes is not disproportionate. It is about the same for white to black, even though those crimes are committed more by black rather than white. And I'm not even getting into the Hispanic and Native and the rest, because I don't think that's why people are actually here, or the big narrative that's going on. And I'm just going to keep scrolling down so they have a little thing that they explain down here further. I'm going to zoom in, and this is the Department of Justice. Relative to their share of the U.S. population, 60%, white people, were underrepresented among offenders in non-fatal violent crimes overall, 52%, and then it breaks it down of all the different things going on. Black people, next paragraph, black people were overrepresented among offenders in non-fatal violent crimes overall, 29%. So what they're saying is, of the percentage of people that are actually involved in these to the percentage of people that they represent within the community of the United States, within our entire population, that white people are underrepresented and black people are overrepresented. That means committing more of these crimes. Now, let's jump to the next table. This one is from the FBI. This is the FBI 2019 is the most current that they have. FBI table for crime in the United States. And we looked just previously at the Department of Justice that uses similar data for non-fatal violent crimes. Let's go to murder and non-negligent manslaughter. Let's go right across the board here. And of the percentage, we get to the middle here, 45.8%. So 46% of all of the murder and manslaughter, non-negligent, is committed by white. 46% approximately. 51% of those is committed by black or African American. Now, keep in mind the percentage that 60% of the population represents white people. 12.5% of the population is black. So you have 60% of the population, which really we talked about earlier, that the majority of these crimes are committed by men. So 30% of the population is committing 46% of the murders. While in the black community, you have 6% of the total, which was the 12.5%. So about 6 to 6.5% men are committing 51% So let's go back to the Washington Post and go, why do you think it is that there are more shootings in there? Because there is more crime. It's pretty straightforward. Let's keep on going down, and we will get to the actual area where you can look at the database. And they made it really simple where you can search their database right here. You search the database, and so let's go according to race of since January 1 of 2015, you can see how many white people were shot by police since January of 2015, 2,884. How many black? 1,504. I thought that it was an overwhelming number. Now, if you ask people on the street, how many people do you think got shot last year? Let's just go, or even if you say how many black people, which is the narrative that Eddie is promoting, that George Floyd, Ma'Khia Bryant, and, excuse me, I think I said their names wrong. George Floyd, Ma'Khia Bryant, and Daunte Wright, that they are being killed in just targeted astronomical numbers, that is the narrative. That is what the RCA, leader of the denomination, is telling you. Well, let's look. Let's just go by race, and let's go to black people within the United States, which is 12.5% approximately. And then let's go to, let's say 2020. 2020 is a good one because that's the most recent with a full year. Or maybe let's do 2019 because 2019 actually was a full year without the COVID craziness. 2020 kicked in full-on COVID craziness and people were kind of locked down. So 2019, this is a standard sort of year. And we have black people that were shot by police in 2019. You have 252 total. 252 people that were black were shot and killed by police in 2019. How many of those, let's go over here to weapon, how many of those were unarmed? 12 people were shot by police, fatally shot, and were unarmed. Okay, well, let's look also at fleeing the scene. How many of them were not fleeing the scene? 5. Okay, so let's just take the 12 number. 12 people in 2019 of how many people in the United States? That does not seem... There is how many millions of people in the United States? I think I got a census data. Let's go census data here. I don't know what table I'm on. This is for 2019. 325 million people. 325.7 million people. I think I'm reading that right. That was pulled up real quick. 12 of them. 12 people were shot and were unarmed, as in not trying to, like Ma'Khia Bryant, kill another person or stab another person or assaulting the police officer. And how many of those, there was a number that were fleeing the scene either with a car, and those, the weapon part doesn't even include whether you were trying to run over a policeman in your car or any of those things. So the false narrative that Americans are systemically racist, specifically police are targeting black individuals, is bonkers. 12 in 2019 out of 300 and some million people. Keeping in mind that a large proportion of the actual crime statistics point towards whites are being underrepresented according to the population, and black people are being overrepresented. This is not me being systemically racist or any of those things. This is me reading information. This is exactly what the narrative will tell you is, oh, well, we can't trust facts and figures because those are a part of the privileged class. And we'll get into that pretty soon. But let's go back to the General Secretary stuff here. Right, both were shot by police, and we just explained how while they were shot by police, one was accidental. Now that was okay. You could accidental who was also trying to flee, climb inside of his car and get something we don't know. She doesn't know, and intended to tase him. The other one, she was shot because she was trying to possibly kill another person or at least harm them with a knife. George Floyd, he was on as much, let's just leave the trial be. But everybody has to acknowledge that the amount of fentanyl and methamphetamines in his body was ridiculously high. Given his own physical status, how much of that did he aid in his own death? Unintentionally so, but how much of that? You have to ask that question. Okay, let's keep going. There's much more work to do in terms of racial justice and dismantling racism. Okay, this is where you got to pause, because Eddie is not saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, you did not say in terms of biblical justice or God's justice or things that are right or unright within God's purview. You are saying that there is racial justice and that it needs to be dismantled. Now, when you dismantle something, then what you are insinuating is that this is a pervasive problem. Not that those 12 people had a problem, but that within the whole scope of the United States, that we are suddenly the most racist place to be, regardless of the 8 years that we had a black president, or regardless of the statistics that talk about the ability to actually come into the country. There was, I think Thomas Sowell shared at one point a statistic that Caribbean Americans that were black moved to Jamaica, Queens, New York, and of the people that were second generation Caribbean Americans versus those that had lived in the United States within those kind of areas, that second generation, after they had been established, far surpassed the actual economic income that they brought in and where they were able to move in mobility as far as social status within economic areas, pointing out that it wasn't necessarily their color, their race, but their ability to decide to do something more, and because many of them had to work really, really hard to just get here. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the point is, when you hear words like dismantling racism, then what that means is it's not bringing everyone underneath the lordship of Christ and acknowledging that sin, capital S, the objective thing, the totally depraving thing within the Reformed perspective, the thing that holds us all at bondage, that's not the problem. The problem is the systems and structures. And you need to tear down those systems and structures. When you talk about dismantling things, that means that somebody built something in place. Now, does the United States have a history that is not so good, that is atrocious, that is awful? Yes. Is it that way now? Sure doesn't seem like it, but they sure want to tell you it is, especially the leader of our denomination and many in the staff in our denomination want you to think that things are so horrible and you white Dutch people are so racist. Because the RCA is a historically Dutch group. Now this brings in, if you're thinking dismantling things and that if there's a systemic problem, you have to understand that this is rooted in oppressor and oppressed language, idea, mindset, conflict theory that goes back, critical theory. Goes back to the struggle of Hegelian logic, that there is a synthesis that happens after a conflict. The same thing that gave birth to Marxism. The same thing that gave birth to the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. The same thing that gave birth to religion being the opiate of the people. Because how long is it before the United States that is founded with Christian ideals? How long before that being the systemically racist, the systemically vile categoried place of oppressors? How long before that turns into a problem within the church? That the church is a part of that systemic racism. Oh, you have heard that. Denise Kingdom Greer, which is avidly promoted within the RCA, she lets you know that the church is complicit in all of the horrible things that have happened. Not that there are bad people, but that the church is bad and we need to do something about it. Because it's not about being a racist or racism anymore. It is about being anti-racist. So it's not good enough that you don't do certain things, that you are not an avid racist, that you are not a person that is a white supremacist, that you are not a person that is against other people. It's not that it's you being against those things. It's you are complicit within the structure. And so you must be anti-racist. It's not good enough to simply not be racist. You need to be anti-racist. So this once again pokes right back at the idea that the struggle is not sin, but the new sin objective, the new struggle that we all have, the new depravity is now oppression and oppressive racism. That's not biblical at all. And let's just keep going here. There is much more work to do in terms of racial justice and dismantling racism. The structures is what you dismantle. In terms of caring for the black community and other racial ethnic communities who do not experience full belonging. This is total feeling language, because you can't argue with statistics, and so you argue with feeling. Within critical theory, then the main tenet there is that my story as an oppressed person trumps your information as an oppressor. Okay, let's just keep going. That they don't experience full belonging. Nobody desires somebody to not experience full belonging, or they don't experience equity. It's not equality. Eddie's not saying that at the foot of cross, the ground is the same and we are all sinners. He's saying that there isn't an equitable outcome. That the outcome is what matters, not whether we all have the ability to acknowledge our sin. Here, and I explained this to my son who runs track, who is 14 years old in 8th grade, and asked, we were talking about some of these things, and I explained it to him this way. Equality is you all line up at the starting line. They say go, or they shoot off the gun, and you run. He runs the 100, the 200, and the medley. And you start running towards the finish line, and whoever wins is the one that gets there first and doesn't commit a fault. Equity. Equality is you all start at the same place. Equity is, well, I'm sorry, because you're faster, you don't get to start when everybody else starts. So we have a staggered start time so that in the end, everyone crosses the line at the same time. So that means that you have to actually be biased against somebody else. You have to oppress somebody else. For him, he would have to be held back in order for somebody to get to the line the same time as him because he's faster than them. Now, this is a rudimentary argument, but this is how equity works. This is how it is applied when we begin to look at the systems of racism that are involved that the RCA is telling you. They're feeding you all of this information, and it's just not true. Now, does racism exist? Yes. I still remember as a kid visiting my step-grandparents. His name was Grumps. He was not a very nice man, and they lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he was very racist to the point where he would not even take a package from the UPS driver who happened to be black because he was black. He told him to set it on the ground, and I walked through the door and took it right from his hands because that stuff is ridiculous. Does that exist? Yes. Is it permeating everything? I don't think so. The data does not show that. Stories may show that, but stories are not always completely unbiased. Okay, let's just keep going here. Next line. In the words of the Belhar Confession, not according to the Bible, but in the words of the Belhar Confession, because that's more relevant to us right now rather than reading something from the Bible. In the words of the Belhar Confession, we believe that God has revealed himself as the one who wishes to bring about justice and true peace among people. Yeah, I totally agree with that. but he wants his justice, his peace. That God calls the church to follow him in this, for God brings justice. God brings justice, not equity bringing justice, to the oppressed and bread to the hungry. You see the oppressed word again. Now keep in mind, this came from South African apartheid. That's a little different situation than what we have in the United States right now. Let's keep on going. For many years, we in the Reformed Church in America have confessed the sin of racism, condemned racism, and pledged to do better. We've been doing that. We are committed to fully seeing the Reformed Church in America freer from racism. This is part of the vision of the Transformed and Transforming, adopted by the church in 2013. This requires all of us to work together. Now, what they're doing is building on the building block of that you should see that there is systemic racism within the black community, but specifically that you see within the news media of people that are being shot at disproportionate rates, and they're not doing anything wrong. That's not true. Well, let's take a look here at, this is the General Synod 2014, where it addresses some of the things that they were just referring to, transformed and transforming. These are the minutes from General Synod. Let me find it here. You'll see that a lot of the big words here are the genesis of this R91 task force is to address white privilege. Okay, let's just keep on going down. So what is white privilege, and is it present in the RCA? What is white privilege? Where does the term come from? And they begin to explain things. Many definitions, some are complex, some are academic. Where's the short one? They have a very short one. For those of you who prefer a more succinct academic approach, here's another definition. A right, an advantage, an immunity granted to or enjoyed by white persons beyond the common advantage of all other people. So just by being white, you have something special. Where does white privilege come from? I mean, we'll answer that question fully in a second, but let's just keep on going. You get down a little further and you begin to see, you're thinking about special perks and advantages and different ways that you navigate, and they go through and they give a person, this is again written from the perspective of white people, and it says, as I got on the plane to General Synod, others may have wondered if I too was headed to Pella for General Synod. What? If I'm white, then I can go unnoticed. When people in the history of RCA is told, it included people of my race, that your privilege of being white is that you experience all these things. Maybe you do. I mean, let's hear. I'm going to click on the entire element and language of white privilege first surfaced by Peggy McIntosh. Peggy McIntosh was a feminist, a women's studies professor on the East Coast. I can't remember exactly where, in the late 80s, I believe. And here's the original paper that she wrote. That what we have now is the knapsack of white privilege, the proverbial thing that you can take out that is your privilege. If you look at this is the initial thing that she wrote when she wrote the paper, and it's called White Privilege and Male Privilege, a Personal Account of Coming to See Correspondences Through Work in Women's Studies. A personal account. This is her walking throughout her day, interpreting things according to her own bias, her own upbringing, her own lifestyle, her own eyes and ears. This is not statistical data. This is not a large system of oppression because you can actually see it in studies. This is a single person has a personal account. And let's go, I'll scroll down and you can see here. This is 1988 is when she published this. Scroll down and it has the intro stuff, and then you get to the things that the RCA was pointing out earlier. 1, these are the things that she observed. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. How is that not true for almost everyone? But to her, it's a white privilege. I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust. She was trained that By whom? Who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure that renting or purchasing a house in an area which I can afford and in which I want to live, that she can move if she wants to move. Okay. I can be reasonably sure that my neighbors in such locations will be neutral or pleasant to me. How do you know any of these things are not true for anybody? This is her own personal account, and it just keeps going on and on. If I want to, I'm pretty sure I can find a publisher for this piece on white privilege. You're a professor. You're writing something to intently with an intention to publish it. I would think that you could do that. Are you saying that black people don't get published? That's not true. I can go into a bookshop and count on finding the writing of my race represented. I can go into the supermarket and find staple foods that fit with my cultural tradition. How does that have anything to do? I love fried chicken just because I'm from the South, not because I'm white or black. I love barbecue. I don't like most Midwestern foods. I don't like things made in a crock pot the majority of the time. I don't like casseroles. What does that have to do with being white or not white or having a privilege? There's even one in here that she says, let's see if I can find it. It just keeps going on. Anyway, where is it? There's one where she talks about she's pretty sure that she can get Band-Aids in the same skin color as her. Well, let's just take a time out there for a second. That you can get Band-Aids? Band-Aids are now racist? Okay, are they racist because the people that make Band-Aids said, what is the percentage of people that buy Band-Aids? Well, if 60% of the population is white, we can't really go too wrong in offering kind of a beige sort of colored Band-Aid. Why does that have to be racist? That everything in here that is some sort of specific white privilege is just her interpretation of things that she thinks. How does this not apply to maybe pedophilia? Everyone's a pedophile. Why? Because I think they are. Well, is that true? Or is it specific people have that struggle and that sin and deserve some sort of accountability? Or is everybody that way? This is reinforcing a false narrative that just, this is not true. And so many years within the RCA, the majority of people that live in the Midwest, the majority of people that are white have just said, well, I don't think I can say anything against this because then I'm going to be called a racist. No, you're being reasonable. You're asking a question. Since when was it not okay to ask a question or risk being offensive to somebody? Just because somebody's offended doesn't mean that they're right or they're wrong. Okay, let's go back to Eddie's stuff here. What I wanted to show you there is the privilege element that a lot of this RCA stuff from Transforming stems from Peggy McIntosh. That her language of white privilege, that white people are bad because they carry this extra special privilege because they are the oppressors and everybody else is oppressed because they don't carry that privilege. That's just a false thing, that's not true, that is just somebody's idea that they decided to write on paper and people are running with it. The RCA thing, maybe I can even go back to that. They even come down fuller and start walking through what does Scripture have to say, and they go to Galatians. There is no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free, no longer male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That doesn't mean that you are only one in Christ Jesus if you lay down your white privilege. Every single one of us. Why does it have to get contorted into something else? You move down further. Philippians 2, 5-8, that Christ did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited, that he emptied himself. That is about Jesus. That as we find ourselves in Jesus, we take on that same mentality. It doesn't mean that suddenly we are a specifically oppressive person just by the color of our skin. If you really believe that somebody is an oppressive person simply by the color of their skin, that is racism. Let's go back to Eddie. Pastors and other leaders, we must work together to dismantle racism in our churches. What if there isn't racism in your church? Oh, there must be, because it's systemic. That's what dismantle gets at. In our denomination and in our communities, Scripture affirms that all people are created equal and all bear the image of God. Amen to that. Then treat us as such. Use language as such. Don't contort things so that it fits an agenda of some lady that wrote a paper in 1988 to make us all feel bad for things that aren't really true. Maybe true for her, but maybe not true for everybody. We must always remember that the Lord requires us to act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with our God. Yes, he does. And that also means not blaming everybody else. This is about what God asks you to do, not that somebody else is at fault. Prayer is foundational for our undertaking to sustaining this work. So I invite you to the annual day of prayer and fasting for justice and reconciliation. We are having a first annual day of prayer for justice and reconciliation, and it's going to be on May 25th. The anniversary of George Floyd's death. Join me with others across the RCA to confess, repent, and pray for justice and reconciliation. You are celebrating a man that committed a massive amount of crime. And one that contributed to his own death by the things that he was doing, by the drugs he was trying to hide within his body and not get charged with. Let's just look at the whole thing here. You are celebrating a man that should not be celebrated. He did not do any of the things that you just said. You said we need to be people that act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. George Floyd did not do any of those things, at least not from the record that we have. In the next month, we will offer resources for observing this day of fasting and prayer within our congregation. We're going to pump the stuff out. Pump it out like they've been doing to help you feel bad. And here's the ending. The Belhar offers us not only direction, but hope. It also says, we believe that God's living word and spirit has conquered the power of sin and death, and therefore also of irreconciliation and hatred, bitterness and enmity. And God's living word and spirit will enable the church to live in a new obedience which can be open to possibilities of life for society and the world. Okay, that's all pretty good. All pretty good. But what's the new obedience directed towards? Is that all of us being directed towards obedience to the one who has conquered the powers of sin and death? Or is that, in your presentation here, new obedience and fasting and prayer on the day of somebody that didn't do any of those things? You're making him a saint within our own church. You're holding him up, saying he's a great person and we're going to celebrate something on that day. This is ridiculousness. It is our prayer that a new obedience, and new possibility for life and society of our world. Here's the thing. People aren't calling this stuff out. And the struggle here is, it begins here. It begins with the struggle of Eddie and a number of the other RCA denominational leaders, General Synod Council. I mean, the list probably goes on, where they put this stuff out and they want you to think that you, by the color of your skin, or if you are back in the blue, or blue as in the police department, if you are part of any of those things, then you must be systemically racist. Well, let's take a little look here. Let's just take a pause and go to the Facebook page of the RCA. And here is, check out the diversity within the RCA. There's a lot of diversity within new congregation plans. And so you see here in 2016, you see, maybe 7 plans that were white. white plants. The leadership of those were white. It doesn't tell you anything about the demographics of the people within them, but the people planting those churches, the leaders within the church, 7 of those new congregation plans were white, and then a few, maybe 3 or 4, were Hispanic, and then 1 was Nepalese. You scroll down a little more and you have, here, 2017, about the same, 7 are white, and then a much larger number, maybe 10-ish, are Hispanic plants. And then you get a few others of whether they're multicultural and Nepalese and Mandarin speaking. Here's what I'm going to get at. We get all the way to the bottom here. You can see that number for white plant leaders relatively stays about the same. But what you will notice is, let's go to 2020. You have, let's say 3, as a guess, maybe 3 new congregation plans that are white leadership. And then you see, 2, 5, 15, maybe 20 plants that are Hispanic. Who has privilege now? Suddenly, let's use the exact same logic here. We go with a RCA General Secretary that I remember, Eddie. Eddie, if you're watching this, I remember when you were coming up through California and working with Tim Vink and all of the church plants that were going on and your passion for the gospel, and you weren't social justice warrioring out there on the front lines. You were advancing the kingdom. You were living into this. Now, should I say that now we look at this and the purple line is a lot bigger, so clearly the privilege is Hispanics within the RCA. RCA is clearly a Hispanic bias, and we're diminishing how many people are within the white community, and you don't even see any in here within black communities. Or can we just celebrate that we're starting new congregations? Can we give them the vision and the goal and the dream of Revelation that there is a tree for the healing of the nations, and we are a part of that call, that all of creation, every single bit, the rocks, the trees, the ground, the air itself, longs for God to bring us back into oneness with Him, back into correct relationship that Jesus has begun and asks us to be a part of. All of those things long for restoration, groan for restoration, and we are trying to bring it about. But what it feels like is you're saying, we're trying to bring it about, but there's a lot of oppressing going on. There's a lot of systemic struggles going on. There's a lot of racial injustice going on. When the reality is when you actually look at the numbers and the stats and the data and not just watch the news, that's not true. I looked last year, right after George Floyd had died and the riots were going on, the peaceful protests and the riots were going on. Right after that in St. Louis, a man was killed. His name was David Dorn. I went right to the Black Lives Matter website, and his name was nowhere to be found. David Dorn was a black man who was a police officer. I believe he was a police chief within the police department, retired, and helping his friend guard his pawn shop, and was killed because somebody wanted to steal a TV in the riots. But you never, ever, ever heard his name. Not once. Why? Because he was trying to do the right thing, and he was a policeman. Eddie, I would ask that you, the RCA, that all of us repent of seeing all of these different variations of sin and not acknowledging that we all need a Savior, that we all fall on the exact same equal footing before the cross as guilty, and that it is only by God's grace that we get through this. That I pray that you will not continue to advance this struggle that is in the media. This is not within the majority of the churches, not unless you keep pushing it and sending out information and resources that help advance a agenda that in the end, right now it may seem like it fits. In the end, this agenda leads towards the exact same place that Marx said, that religion is simply the opiate for the people. We use it to assuage them for a little bit so that we can get them to do what we want. This is the desire for a different utopia. and not the one that Christ says, behold, a new heavens and a new earth coming out of the sky. I long for that day where we don't fight about these things. For the rest of y'all, if you stuck around this long, I think we're looking at 50 minutes or so. I hope you feel a little more enlightened. If you felt stuck in the middle and not sure what some of this stuff means or how it all relates together, or some of the stats versus the things that you see on the news media, I hope that was helpful. And if you're looking for more info on some of these things, a new book that came out is by Vodi Bakum, Fault Lines, that he truly sees a lot of this social justice critical theory and intersectionality as a fault line like you have in California or other areas, Haiti, where it's right on the edge of something big shaking out like an earthquake. Neil Shenvi has done so much research. He is really, really good as far as just raw statistical data. You can find all of their stuff online or on Audible or Amazon. And then one that probably most people don't know that I've encountered over the last few weeks is a podcast called Conversations That Matter by a guy named John Harris. I believe that's his name. And he comes from a Southern Baptist perspective. I think he lives in Virginia or somewhere. But he's pointing out a lot of these things, that all of us can be involved in this. And the way to be involved is to not just idly sit by and go, well, I guess they just believe that, and that's fine with me. That it's okay to voice your opinion, and you're not a racist for saying some of that stuff is actual racism. Well, we've gone quite a ways. Climbed the labyrinth a little bit. Yeah, we'll see y'all next time.